Welcome to this fireside chat with Jeff Carter and Adham Chebbani from Arxspan, a Bruker company. During this short but lively conversation, the speakers will discuss issues related to data security and privacy. We will be taking questions at the end, but feel free to submit them during the session using the chat function to the right. Thank you, and over to you, Jeff and Adham.
So, Adham, we find ourselves here again for another fireside chat. These are interesting, especially I find our prep sessions to be particularly interesting because we get to kind of explore these topics in advance while we think about how we're going to run the conversation. What do you think?
I think they're great, honestly. It gives me enough time to kind of sit back and try and understand, what makes me scratch my head. And after, chatting with customers and chatting with people in our industry remotely, living on Zoom, a lot of these ideas and questions and thoughts kind of come up. So I think it's been pretty helpful.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, one of the most interesting is really this conversation, I think, for us breaks down into two pieces, right? One of them is actually pretty closely related to the last fireside chat that we did on data silos,
right.
And how you build permissions in an enterprise, search environment. And then the other piece is more application specific, right? Where the question is more isolated to who can see which things and when can they see those things, and who can do which things and when can they do those things. So, I think that's kind of where we're going with this. Where do you want to start? Which topic do you want to address first?
Well, I think if we talk about specific use cases or specific, not necessarily use cases, but specific application type things, like why is it important, or do different groups need to see the same thing within a company, and what types of solutions can I kind of address that, right? Because there are in my mind there are companies within companies, basically. So it's like, how do you keep that data segregated, or how do you keep security, above everything else?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that there's a lot of layers to that onion to peel back, right? Because I think most times when people think about access, they think about, well, I would like to see all the data, but I only want the CRO to see their own data. Or I would like the chemists to see chemistry data, but biology to see biology data, because they don't need to see each other's data. And it's not even so much about putting restrictions on it in that latter case. It's more about just like they don't want to clutter up the workspace with information, data that they don't need, right? But I think it gets, when you take it to the next step, it sort of gets down to, well, I want this group of people to be able to see all of the data of this particular record type, like a registration, for example. But this other group of people, the only thing that I really want them to be able to see is, for example, the reg ID and the project name or something like that, right? And so it actually becomes field specific. And then if you look at it at the field level, you start to think, okay, well, really there's 4 different things that you can do with any piece of data, right? You can create new data, you can view what's there, you can edit things that are there, and you can delete them, right? So now you've just made the problem 4 times more complicated, right? Because you want to be able to allow users or groups of users any or all of those 4 things, right? And then there's yet another step beyond that where it's not even just binary. It's not, can you see it or not see it? It's, well, we have an internal name that we call this project by, but when I work with this external partner, I want to call it by an alias or a code name, right? And so that actually is even one step more complicated, because let's say, for example, I've got a project ABC, but when I talk to you, I want to call it DEF. It's easy to think about, right? It's like, well, just, when I'm talking to you and I'm talking about ABC, I say DEF, and this happens all the time in our space, life science, because people name projects after targets, and then they don't want to share the target name with a CRO, and so they come up with an alias, right? And now you've got every user has a little Excel sheet or a printout taped up in their cube on which, in their home office right now, but, which projects have which aliases. But that gets really complicated and error prone, right? And so the way that you want to do that is you want to set those aliases up in an electronic system so that they're just handled, right? If you start to look at the scope of that problem, it's big. Right. Because it's easy enough that, if I have to display a record to a user, I just look at what that user's permissions level are, and I either show them the real name or I show them whatever alias they're supposed to see. But what happens when they search for things? They want to search by their alias name, right? They don't want to search by their alias name. The only thing that they know to search for is the alias name, right? So now you not only have a display problem, you have a search problem, right? Like, I'm trying to find this, and you have to cater the search relative to what the incoming user's permissions are, right? And return them the results that are specific to them. So even if you just look at this in a single application context, it gets to be a very complicated problem very quickly. And I think that, different people in the informatics space in our industry have different approaches to these things. And when I say people, I mean customers, sorry. And different vendors have different approaches to solving this problem as well. And you have to be really careful to make sure that whatever solution you're building or buying matches up with the level of permissions and configurability that you really need to have to run your business, right? And of course, as it happens, just not coincidentally, Bruker supports everything that I just talked about, because why wouldn't we? But I do think that we have actually really good coverage for stuff like this. And I don't know the vendor space inside and out, but I know that what I do know, just because we've had to work through it, is it's a really complicated problem space. And there's a lot of nuances to it that need to be thought all the way through before you can be sure that you've got all your bases covered in terms of use cases for permissions and stuff.
Sorry, I had to mute there. Just to keep the background noise out. But I know what our product does, right? I know what Arxspan does as a solution, but have you found any sort of, issues with that masking, how we mask different data to keep it sort of secure, or even, like you said, I think it's more of a decluttering thing between or among groups within a company than it actually is to make sure that they don't see each other's work. Obviously, from a CRO standpoint, a lot of our customers or a lot of the people we encounter use half a dozen up to 20, 30, 40 different CROs at a time. So, how can a system be as robust or be robust enough to actually handle all that kind of data?
Well, actually, I think there are a few vendors that do a good job of it, but we've built our permissions model up right from right from the ground up. It was like the first thing that we did when we designed the product on the whiteboard is make sure that the permissions model worked the way that in a way that it was going to be flexible enough to support all of the use cases that we thought of at the time. And the masking really wasn't one of them. That was brought to us from a customer, and it is a problem that a lot of customers face because most companies do that and do the aliasing, but I also think most of them don't have a robust electronic solution for managing all those aliases and also plumbing all of the relevant user actions through the aliasing logic. So I think that that's kind of a special case, but it's a special case that's high value, and I'm sure there's parts of the problem that you and I don't know about, and I'd love to hear about them from anyone in the audience, because there's probably parts of this problem that we don't have a great solution for, but I think what we do have is very comprehensive rather, and very robust
and customizable and agile and all of that. I agree. I think it's important to be able to do that. Now, if we want to kind of bridge it back to what we were talking about last time with the different data types or different data silos, that's when it starts to kind of make clouds appear in my brain, right? So it's like you're linking inventory or registry data or uniqueness data to a different project or a different notebook or a different user. I mean, that just sounds like, propagation of error or propagation of complexity. Like is that something you think is inherent in the actual in data security as a whole, or is it something that can be addressed on a case-by-case basis?
So this does go back to the data silo discussion that we had a month ago or so. And you're right. This is when the problem gets really, really complicated, because if you remember from that webinar, what we talked about was replication of data into a data warehouse or querying the data in place. We talked a little bit about the data publisher component that we have for replicating data into a customer's environment so that they can layer a query tool like a Spotfire, Tableau, or whatever homegrown solution, D360 on top of it. But it's, at least in our case, we don't replicate the permissions information across with data publisher. And I think that even if our customers had direct access to our databases, it would be a very heavy lift for them to implement all of our permissions logic into a query tool like that, right? And so it puts you almost all the way full circle to where if you want the access and permissions information to come through with your searches, you almost have to use an API to do that. But there's huge downsides to that. Like, for example, APIs can be fast, but they're not real query tools. So you can't do like a join of a record set like you would in a database, for example. There's a lot of things that you can't do with APIs that you can do with databases, just generally speaking. Right. And so, and the worst thing really I think that you want to do is try to have two permissions models around the same data just because one of them is in an application and one of them is in a data warehouse, right? So there are some new products that are coming out now to try to solve this kind of regulatory problem of who gets access to data and when they get it. it's a major issue, and it's not just an issue for life science. It's just a data issue in general, right? And it does get massively complicated because, of course, if you just take our local example with Data Publisher, go back to the aliases, right? It's almost like you would have to replicate a different set of data depending on who was querying it, right? If you've got if I search by a target name and you're searching by an alias name, and I want to surface that data in an enterprise tool, then I have to at least know what the real value is and what the alias value is, and what what data can be shown to whom. Right. And again, this is when we come full circle back to the API. Well, the API does that. Well, that's great, but an API is not going to work for somebody who wants to do, aggregate operations on big sets of data like you can do in a database. So I believe it to be a relatively unsolved problem, and I believe that it is not a standardized thing to be able to do stuff like this. So again, another area in which I would love to hear from the audience, like, oh no, we have that here, we use this and it works great. I'm not aware of anything like that, but it would certainly be of interest to know, if there's something out there.
Right. Or even suggestions or ideas. Cause like you're saying, I mean, in my mind, the data has to, all the original data or the origin or everything that's being referenced, and the data that is whose source is being masked or replicated, that all has to live somewhere. And then if that's in a database, then you then have to basically set permissions and security around all of that data. But then the issue arises when you're trying to replicate that or send it somewhere else. How do you replicate the permissions, or how do you, I guess the better word would be, how do the permissions get through to the next layer? And I guess that would be really interesting. So I would really like to know if anyone has questions around that, because it's definitely something that it needs to be. It's going to be a big point of contention for big data, I think.
Well, there are definitely ways to do it. But the problem is that I'm not aware of a standard way to do it, right? Which means, if we were to do something, it would either be product specific, whatever the downstream product is, or it would be customer specific if we're looking at some kind of custom implementation. So it's, I don't think it's not doable. I think that just for these kinds of things, you want to have a standard, right? That you can say, hey, like for single sign-on, hey, we support SAML and OAuth. Great. So for this kind of thing, you want to say, hey, we support ABCXYZ. Oh, cool. That's how we do it too, right? And right. I don't think there's a standard like that right now.
Right. I agree. Well, I mean, thanks always for, just sharing and your insights into this are, usually first source kind of thing. So, I mean, I think it's definitely something that we will, continue working at. And I think our product does a really good job, as do other products. So anything else to add?
No, I think, as you and I have always discussed, the primary reason why we keep these discussions so short and concise is because what we really want is participation in the Q&A, because that's when stuff gets interesting. I mean, I'm sure you feel the same way, but I talk to you every day.
Right. No, yeah, you don't want to
talk to some other people and hear from them. You know what I mean? And like that's the interactive part, I think, is when it gets fun. So why don't we get on to that?
Sure.
Well, thanks, guys. That was great. Now it's time for Q&A, so please feel free to submit your questions using the chat function. Adam, over to you.
Hey, everyone. It's Adam, and we have a bunch of questions in the queue already. Please feel free to continue asking, typing them in, and whatever ones we can't get to, we will reply via email. So why don't we start off with one here. Jeff, a customer, or this isn't a specific customer, it's unknown, but I have multiple CROs and we use different project codes for each of our CROs. Is that supported and how?
Okay, so yes, it's supported. It's not per, I wouldn't call it per CRO, we do it per group. So for example, you can set up a group of users A and a group of users B, and you can assign different project codes or aliases to each one of... Hello?
Oh, you're good.
Oh, thanks. And you can assign each one of those groups a different set of aliases. So the way that we would recommend that you implement this is that you put all the users from one CRO into one group and all the users from another CRO into another group, and map your different project codes onto those different groups. And you can accomplish that using that kind of a configuration.
So it's pretty straight. It's pretty out of the box.
It's totally out of the box. Yeah. Okay. It's just a terminology question.
Yeah, no, for sure. Cool. Okay, let's jump to the next one. Is programming required to set up the security settings in Arxspan? I think I get that one. So,
no. So everything that, all of the configurations that we allow are enabled through a browser-based interface. So as long as you know what you're doing through training, you can set any of the security permissions right there in the UI, and they are active immediately as soon as you press the save button. I should actually take this opportunity to point out that we do have a very extensive and robust set of REST APIs available if customers want to do more invasive things like integrating with internal systems, or even just referencing internal systems in the course of validating data. So for this specific question, no, there's no programming required, but we have, like I said, a very extensive and robust set of APIs that we use to enable a lot of our own behaviors in the product that's available for customers to use as well.
Got it. That's really bizarre. The next question sort of, I guess, ties into that pretty well. It's in regards to our data publisher. And this person was asking, they use Oracle database. So what database platform does Data Publisher support?
Data Publisher is pretty robust. So it supports Oracle, PostgreSQL, and Microsoft SQL Server currently.
Okay. So pretty much 99% of what is out there already.
All the big ones, yeah. All the big relational databases.
Gotcha. Okay. So I think that's all we have that was sent in. We'll give it, we'll give you a link or an email to send follow-up questions to if need be. But again, thanks again, Jeff, and everyone for attending, and reach out with any other questions in the meantime.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.